As these markets react, how much of it is because of trade, the fear of trade, the relief from the fear of trade, and how much of it is actually what the Fed has done and how they've really backed off on the rate hike? And some people now are warning maybe inflation could kick in. I'm going to put up a chart right now that shows the break-evens across the different Treasury maturities. And listen, they're not back up where they were a year ago, but still they're on their way up. Do we see inflation on the horizon at all?
Yeah, I think we do. And I think that's a really, really interesting point, because what we're seeing when we speak to our clients is that they are confused, right? People are undecided which way this is all going. So on one hand, people expect to slow down. So they think that, fine, this risk rally can only go on for so long before maybe there's further earnings downgrades. But on the other side, we already know that there is wage growth. We already know that the labour market is tight. So at some point, this is likely to produce inflation. And at that point, the Fed surely will be under pressure to hike again. So the markets will be under pressure. And
does the Fed even, at least some parts of the Fed, even want some inflation potential? We had John Williams, the president of the New York Fed, actually, just last week saying, we have seen some worrying signs, let's roll the prompter, please, worrying signs of a deterioration of measures of long-run inflation expectations in recent years. The risk of the inflation expectations anchor slipping toward shore calls for a reassessment of the dominant inflation targeting framework. So it sounds like he's a sailor, but beyond that, is this a signal from the Fed that maybe we're willing to let this thing run a little hot, as they say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's what's the growing thesis now, is that we're moving to, inflation overshooting, price level targeting. This has been thrown around for years and years by economists and academics. This is the right way to go for central bank targeting. I think the key risk, which is why it hasn't been really pursued over the last 10 years, is the risk that you completely de-anchor inflation expectations. Because price level targeting is extremely difficult for people to understand. There's so many different ways of inflation measuring, and if you don't really understand what that target is, so you don't have a 2% target, but you just know at some point it's going to be over, some point it's going to be below, it's confusing.
What about the other option, which is sort of average inflation targeting? So over X amount of years, you average it out, maybe you're at 1.8%, then you know you need to run the economy a little hotter. Does that clear anything up for you?
Look, I mean, I can understand why we may be going in that direction. After the last 10 years, we've noticed that, we know that deflation is a bigger threat than inflation, and it's safer to move on the higher side. Unfortunately, even with average inflation targeting, it's a similar issue. It's again, we struggle to forecast more than kind of a year out, sometimes 6 months. So for them to be assuming that we can average it out over a long period, I think it's a tough one.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if history is a guide, once inflation starts to get out of control, it runs. You can't dial it back that easily. But is history a guide? Is it a different world now because of technology, because of globalizations, so we're not as worried about it? Or do we need to listen to the Paul Volckers of this world and say, wait, I was there when we did this, it's really ugly?
I think there's two sides to this. I mean, I think both of them are really good points, because it is a different time. We have had that globalization technology impact, which means that we're unlikely, I think, to see inflation of the kind of levels that we did see a couple of decades ago. But at the same time, we also have to be very cognizant that once you de-anchor inflation expectations, it can run away with you.